This is Mark Peterson with the Frog Outside the Well Research Center, and today we're going to learn about chokpo. In fact, for the next 3 sessions, we're going to have segments on learning about how to read your chokpo. This will be good for Korean Americans and other Koreans overseas, kyopo, who want to learn how to read your genealogy. And we have helping us today is Brayden O, who's a 3rd generation American, Korean American, who does not speak Korean, but he's a very, very bright young man, and he's going to a very nice engineering school in Massachusetts, and the equivalent of MIT, like his father and his uncle. And he's figured out how to read chokpo on his own. And we're going to do 3 videos. The first one is about how to read your own immediate family, grandparents, and the basic birth and death data. The second video will be looking at marriage relationships and a little bit about the biography and a little bit about burial data. But mainly the thing that will be most important to you will be learning about marriage relationships and how to look up the wife's line, the grandmother's line, if you want to look that up. And then the third video is going to be how to trace your ancestry from that immediate family of your father, grandfather, and grandmother and such, and then how to go up and up and up to the ascending line of how to make your way through a multi-volume chokpo. And I have a very, very special guest today, and this is Brayden O. Is that right, Brayden?
That's right.
Welcome. It's good to have you here. How old are you?
I'm 21.
Wow. And you just started to look at this genealogy, and you saw my videos and started to figure things out. And you have done a wonderful job. You've really figured out a lot of things really well. Let's look at your genealogy. Your Korean name is Kwangbae, huh?
Kwangbae.
Yeah. And you don't speak Korean.
I do not. Not a lick.
Your father came to America to study, and here's your father's name. It's Young Hee, but he goes by David.
Yes. He was actually born in the States.
Oh, was he?
He was born in Alabama.
Oh, my goodness. Okay. Well, according to the genealogy, he was born in 1969, and he's a MIT graduate in astroengineering.
That's right.
Well,
he works on spacecraft.
On spacecraft. Oh, wow. And then according to the genealogy here, your mom has an American name, Maori, Bryn Maori.
That's right.
Yeah, okay. And you have an uncle named Moonhee, who also went to MIT.
That's right. That's right.
Oh, my goodness. And also majored in astroengineering. Okay, if we look at the genealogy, next line up is your father's father is listed as the number 2 child.
Oh, and I should say that note there, it says no Julie. My father did have a sister, but she died when she was 12, I believe.
Oh, this is a bad thing about genealogies. They tend to under-record juvenile deaths. And so you can't rely on a genealogy. Genealogy books, the chokpo, are really, really interesting because they have some things that are very, very reliable. They have other things you've got to be a little bit cautious about. And you can't look at this genealogy and say, well, there were 2 brothers, and that's it. Because there could be, you know, in your case, like your Aunt Julie, who died young. There could be infant deaths, too. And, you know, in the old days in America and Korea, you know, infant mortality was a real thing. And children very often died before they were 1 year old. That's why in Korea, the 1-year birthday is a big thing, because they've made it. If you can make it 1 year, you might survive childhood. Okay, then it goes up to your grandfather, and he has 4 sisters listed here.
Yes.
And they all have, I hate to tell you, Japanese style names.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Their names are Youngja, Kyungja, and Chunja. That ja ending is the equivalent in Japanese is ko. And the Youngja, I think, is Eiko, and Kyungja might be Kajiko or something, and Chunja might be Junko. The go ending is a popular ending for female names in Japanese. And so this This shows, in fact, they were born in 31, 39, 43, and 44. It shows they were born in the Japanese era, before Korea was liberated from the Japanese occupation in 1945. So they've got very, very Japanese sounding names. And they, especially your Aunt Youngja, do you know her? Does she have any other name? She never immigrated to the United States, so you don't know.
I don't think so. I've never met her.
Yeah. Well, her name Youngja, she was born in 1931, so she would have grown up speaking Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
She would have gone to a Japanese school or Japanese school because all the schools in Korea were in Japanese. But it's interesting. Your genealogy prizes academic excellence, and that a great aunt of yours, Youngja, is listed as having a degree in English.
Oh.
And her husband has a master's degree in English.
Really?
Yeah. And
which daughter is that?
That's the first one, Youngja.
That's the first one.
Uh-huh. And then the next daughter, Kyungja, she was born in 1939, and she has a degree in English literature. And her husband went to law school. It says he's a lawyer.
Ah.
And then the third daughter, born in 1943, she has a degree in English literature, which makes me wonder what these kids are all doing getting degrees. And the fourth one has a degree in English language or literature as well. The third one, again, her husband, he has a degree in English literature. So it mentions the degrees that these people all had, but it doesn't say where they worked or what they did or anything else about them. So it's really quite it shows that this chokbo is biased toward educational achievement and recording educational degrees and things. So that's your sisters, your grandfather's sisters, and that's pretty much it for page 722 or 742. But let's go down and look at 741 because you did a lot of work on 741.
Struggling through this one.
Well, it's remarkable what you've done. Tell me, how did you do the Chinese? Did you scratch it in on Naver?
So, how did I do it? It was a little convoluted. I found a Korean or a Chinese to Hanja converter, and so I switched the characters over, and then I threw the Korean characters that came out into Google Translate to get the pronunciations off.
How did you put the character in? How did you input the character?
So on my computer, I can draw the characters, but I also have a friend who studied Mandarin for a few years who uses an app called Pleco, just an app. And so I have a Chinese keyboard.
You write it in. You can scratch it in.
That's right. So I can scratch it in, or I can type, but I've been scratching.
Yeah.
And then I can copy the characters out of my phone into.
Oh, that's marvelous. So Pleco, I don't know Pleco. It might be more of a Chinese-based one. The Koreans tend to use Naver.
Naver?
Naver. And Naver has a Hanja dictionary, and it's the same thing. You can scratch it in. And when you scratch in a character as best you can, and technically you're supposed to write a character in a certain sequence in a certain way, but that doesn't matter. You just scratch it in any way you can to make it look like what you're looking for. And then it gives you a 4x4 grid, 16 options of what they think it is. And you look at it, and it's usually the first one. Oh yeah, it's this first one. Or sometimes it's the second or third one. And you click on that, and then in another window, it opens and tells you all about that character.
Got it.
So whether it's Pleco or whether it's Naver, you scratch them in and away you go. And that's what you did. And you learned a lot that way.
Lots of fun.
Lots of fun. I like your attitude. So let's look at Piru, your great-grandfather. And there's a square underneath him with 6 characters in it that you translated as C, center volume, page 443.
Mm-hmm. So the thing that was hard was trying to figure out how to, so I started by just trying to trace translate his ancestors' names, but I found that wasn't very helpful because we've got 3 of these volumes that each have like 1,000 pages in them.
That's right.
And so once I could recognize numbers on my own, as I was just reading through, I noticed the block of numbers And so translated the characters in the left-hand column and realized that was a center volume reference.
Yeah. That's very good. That's very smart of you. And you said once you learned how to recognize numbers, to do genealogy, you have to memorize a certain set of things. And the first thing is Chinese numbers, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But luckily just 1 through 10, and the rest of them fall into place very easily.
That's right. Okay, so we'll come back to this in a minute, to page 443. What is it about page 443? How do you understand what that is? The central volume, page 443.
I saw that the characters were the same for his, for Piru's name. And so his father, it says he's the oldest son, and so his father's just directly above him. Well, I took a stab yesterday at translating a bunch of the dates in there.
Yeah, well, the point is that 443 is the ongoing page to trace.
Oh, yes.
You trace this ancestor up, your father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and now what are you going to do? You're at the top of the line. How are you going to find out? And you go to page 443, and there he is on the bottom of the page.
There he is on the bottom.
And then you go up and up and up and up again, and then you can go up to the next page and the next page. We'll do that in a minute. But that's what you were proud of, that you had figured out how to trace your lines upward.
Yes, because once I knew how to route through the books, I now know how to trace the whole family relation all the way back.
Bingo.
And your right angle drawing for the shape of a jokbo was very very helpful.
Yeah, conceptually,
that's picturing how that works.
Yeah, good. I'm so glad you watched my earlier videos. Let's read about your great-grandfather. His name is Piru, and there's the Hangul for it, and it comes from, to go onward, we go up to page 443 in the central volume. And then the next 3 characters before that circle, you haven't outlined what that is. You probably don't know what that is.
That's right. I have not figured out what that first column, the leftmost column, means.
Forget it. You don't need to know.
Don't need to know?
No. It's that first character is Jia, which means Chinese character, but in this context, it means his pen name or his familiar name. And this is just another name that he went by.
Okay.
And so that's not very important, but it turns out his other name was Unsang. But it turns out that's extraneous information. It's not really germane to anything else you want to do.
Okay.
The next character, after that circle, the next character is Ho, which is his formal pen name. And not everyone in Korea had a Ho. If you were a prominent writer or a prominent scholar of something or other, you would get a Ho. And so the fact that he has a Ho means he has some degree of prominence. And it says his Ho is Dokchang, the virtuous and clean stream. So Ho are always very uplifting, laudatory, very often have to do with nature. It's such and such a rock or such and such a stream. Those sorts of things become the Ho. Then you've got another circle, and you've circled the character at the bottom of that line that says Sang. And you figured out that means
when he was born.
He was born, that's right.
And I have since figured out what the next 4 characters are, since I gave you my notes. And so I found that those first 2 characters are dynastic. Is that right? That's
right. That was the king.
The king at the time.
Yeah.
And then the next 2 are the you were talking about in your video, Kapja.
Yeah. The cycle of 10 against 12, the 10 cycle, the 12 cycle rotate against each other, and that creates a 60-year cycle. And another way to look at it is if you go through the 10 cycle 6 times and go through the 12 cycle 5 times, you've come back to 60. And so it's a 60-year cycle, and this was the way they reckoned all their dates and birth dates and years or events when things happen. Okay, you've got an interesting thing here. So you figured out that it was 1909. Did you notice that King Kojong's reign ended in 1907?
Oh, I did not.
Yeah. And this brings up an interesting point, and that is there are errors in Chokbo.
I ran into that two more generations up the line. I got some more questions for you.
Okay, good. Some people in Korea discount Chokbo as a historical source, as a reliable source. They say it's full of errors, but I see a lot of value in the Chokbo. Have you seen my video about Edward Wagner?
I don't think so.
He was my teacher at Harvard, and one of the things he did was he showed Koreans that they can use Chokbo as a historical source, because up to his time in the 50s and 60s, Koreans were just throwing the Chokbo out, saying, "Oh, it's not reliable. People have bribed their way in. It's a completely unreliable resource." But Ed Wagner at Harvard proved that it's like any other resource. It has errors. Mm-hmm. You collaborate it with a second and a third resource, and you've got some real data that way.
Wow.
So this is an error, technically, but it's a minor error because Ko Jong had been off the throne for 2 years, but he ruled for, how long was he on the throne? He was on the throne from 64 to 07, so 50-some years or so, 40-something years. So he was on the throne for a long time, so to miss it by 2 years is no big deal.
Okay. I did notice when I tried to that combination of 4 characters that the last time that happened was like 1249 or something like that. Yeah. I'm like, oh, great grandpa was a little older than I thought he was.
Yeah, exactly. That you bring up another point, and that is in analyzing genealogy, you just use common sense in a lot of cases. You know, what makes sense? You know, is the father 30 years older than the son or 90 years older than the son? Well, he's 30 years older. You know, it makes more sense that way. And then you've got the 5th month and no, you don't have it there, but you figured that out since then, that he was born on the 5th month and the 8th day. Is that right?
May 8th.
Some people treat this date with much more gravity than they need to, because this is a lunar calendar date. Okay. And some people like to figure out in 1909, the 5th month and the 8th day in the Western calendar was really, let's see, would have been like the 7th month and the 21st day in the Western calendar. And people go through all of that to figure out exactly what day it was in the West. And I think that's nonsense. I think the Korean calendar has its own validity. But to preserve the integrity of that, I like to say that I don't like to translate Owel as May.
Okay.
As the 5th month. I like to say it was the 5th month.
Okay.
And then that tells you that in the Western calendar, it would have been a little bit different because the calendars are off just a little bit. You know how much they're off is how much Chinese New Year's is off.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, you know how we have Chinese New Year, usually sometime late January, February, as late as early March, you have Chinese New Year. Well, that's January 1st in China, but I like to say the 1st month and the 1st day, and then it goes on from there. So
that's good to know.
Yeah, the Western calendar tends to be a little bit older. So this 5th month, 8th day was probably the 7th month. You figure the day, but I think it's better to just leave it in the old Korean calendar. And then,
if I were to upload it to like Family Search, some kind of free online database, then I would.
They tend to respect the Chinese date.
Okay.
Years ago, they kind of transposed things to the Western calendar, but these days they say, no, just the date they say is it's actually better, because if you're corresponding, looking them up in other sources, and all of a sudden you've transferred it to July and you find another person that was born in May, you may think that's a different guy. So it's probably better to keep the original date. And I think Family Search keeps the original dates these days.
Okay.
The next thing you've got is what? What's that next character you circled?
The next one I circled, that's the death date, or the death. I don't know what that character is called.
In Korean, it's pronounced Jol.
Jol?
Jol. And it's an interesting character because in a document like this, they don't say death. They don't want to be heavy-handed and sad about this. Jol actually means to graduate, to move on to the next line.
That's great.
Yeah, the word for graduation from high school or college is chorop. Chorop. Chorop means to finish, actually, and op means your work. So chorop is to finish your high school work, to finish your college work. And so here it's finished. He's finished his life work.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a fun character. And he died then in 1999. You got a bunch of 9s there, so that reinforces your learning of the Chinese letter.
That's right.
999. And you wrote it down February 19th, and that's fine. I say I'm kind of fussy. I would have said second month, 19th day, but that's all right.
Second month, 19th day.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the end of part one, how to look at the basic birth and death data for the father and grandfather, the immediate family. Join us next time for part two, where we'll look at marriage relationships. So this is Mark Peterson, the frog outside the well. We'll see you next time. Bye.